Hi, I'm Berni B, and I'm here to talk some more about endings and how endings matter. And by that I mean uh, all endings, sort of endings of chapters as well as endings of life. But I'm going to particularly focus uh, today on endings and why authenticity matters uh, within that. And I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I have, as a funeral celebrant, helped several families say goodbye to people who were dearly loved and lost, um, either because they had lived a full and long life and they had reached a natural end at the ages of 80, 90, whatever. But more often than not, sadly, because someone had died far too young as a result of cancer or as a result of suicide. Um, and the grief and the loss and the making sense of that, and why authenticity is so important um, to getting a foothold on that. It's a phrase I use a lot, that journey, those first footsteps on that rocky unknown terrain that you have to walk through grief. And I can't imagine what that must be like at any point in life, but particularly after an early or sudden death, um, and a sudden and unexpected loss. And I know that whatever I say to any family at that time, and any group of family, of friends, or any community at that time is not going to heal their pain and grief and anger and sadness and sense of loss and sense of being lost, not just the loss of the person that they loved, but the loss of a huge chunk of themselves and where they fit into the space that they exist in. Without that other person, all their anchor points or some of their anchor points are lost too, and you have to grieve all of that. Grief changes us, and so you're not just grieving the loss of the person and trying to make sense of the reasons behind that. You're grieving the loss of part of yourself, or the self that you were when that person was around, and through no fault of theirs and no fault of yours, the entire dynamic of your life and your entire perspective on your life and where you fit into that space is damaged and destroyed, and you have to reinvent and rebuild everything. And sometimes the devastation is so much that even the foundations are not there to build on, and you do wonder how you're going to carry on with that. And I believe that the first step to doing that is based on authenticity, and that is being as honest as you can with yourself and with your grief and with those around you about how that makes you feel. And that might not sit very comfortably, because what you want to say is that you feel sad or grief stricken or heartbroken and all of the natural words we associate with loss. But what you might be feeling is angry or disappointed or numb, not feeling anything at all, disbelief. You might feel absent from yourself. And never mind everyone else. You might just feel absent, and it's really hard to grasp your authenticity, and that will have changed. What that means to you will have changed. And I think as a celebrant, I've been thinking about this ever such a lot recently, because when you go and you sit alongside a family in grief and you listen to their stories, and they are telling their stories of their perceptions and their interactions and their relationships, and how that person's life rippled into theirs. If you also knew that person, you are dealing with your own grief as well. So, am I saying that by not crying, not sharing my own sense of loss, being strong for someone else, I'm not being authentic? No, I'm not. What I'm saying is that sometimes putting on a front in order to support someone else doesn't make you less authentic. I recently had to, well, I didn't have to. I wanted to officiate the goodbye of a friend of mine who has been dealing with and living with, alongside her family, terminal cancer for a really long time. And eventually she called me to the hospital and said, it's time. I haven't got the strength anymore. I'm really sorry. I said, don't be ridiculous. You know, you are the most strong, amazing person I know, one of those, and just making the decision that now is the time and that enough is enough is a strong thing to do. And you do not need to apologize for deciding that you've had enough. But following that, she made it very clear that she wanted me to create her goodbye and her celebration of life in two parts. And I was privileged and honoured to do that. But it was really hard. But that didn't mean by not crying and not sobbing and not falling apart, which is what I perhaps wanted to do on that day, didn't mean I wasn't being authentic. I was being supportive of those who knew her more and were in her life every day. And I could do that and acknowledge my own personal grief in my own authentic way, but I didn't have to do that in front of them and not be able to deliver what I needed to deliver on that day. So authenticity isn't about constantly living in that moment and sharing every emotional bit of grief that you have at that moment. It's more than that. It's acknowledging your authentic self within. And then that got me thinking about grieving and how we grieve or how we feel when someone dies, and the importance of authenticity in that for family and friends and community, because everyone will experience their grief and loss in a different way, and everyone will need to behave in a different way. Perhaps sometimes they will need to be alone, sometimes they'll need the support of others, sometimes they'll cry, sometimes they'll be angry, sometimes they will just not know what they are, why they are, or anything. And you just need to be sat alongside them. And they need to, we need to, as a community of people, facilitate that holding of space and being alongside somebody or a group of somebodies and be patient. That's why we live in a community. Is so that we can lift each other at our different times and support each other and work together to get from one side of things to another. But the other important thing about authenticity and loss is that we represent the person who has died in ways that feel authentic to us about who they were and the impact they had on us. And not all of that is going to be joyful and happy and full of positivity. Sometimes people were pains in the arse. I know I'm a pain in the arse, and I hope that when the time comes that people have to remember me, they will acknowledge that I was also a pain in the arse. Because if you don't talk about all the facets of a person and acknowledge all the facets of a person, then you are not helping yourself come to terms with what you've lost, but you're also not representing them. Um, I'm quite a difficult person sometimes. I know it's hard to believe. Um, and hopefully I'm difficult for the right reasons, and I make mistakes, of which I'm usually hugely embarrassed and ashamed, but they are my mistakes, and the only reason that they matter to me when I make them is because I care so much about the situation that I was in before. So, I make mistakes. I forget things. I'm a menopausal woman. I forget things all the time. I can get confused. I get my son's name wrong. I get my son's partner's name wrong. I get angry at things I shouldn't get angry at. But they're all part of life. We are complex, and our relationships with other people are complex, and they are not black or white. They're multifaceted. And as a funeral celebrant, I try really hard when I'm talking with a family to facilitate them to say all the things. Quite often you're sat with a family, and I'm sure if any of you are listening in and you're a celebrant, you will sense that there is some not perfect Hollywood dynamic within the family that you're talking about. And they feel that they need to apologize for that. And I feel that my job within that is to acknowledge the normality of their abnormal um, family dynamic, because all families are complicated. At the end of the day, none of us live in that you know sickly sweet Disney idyllic family situation. When you start thinking about those anyway, they're usually not. When you dig deep down, there's all sorts of complex dynamics in there. So I really encourage families to talk about the positives as well as their negative emotions, because I think that's really important. If you are all trying as a family to come to terms with a grief and a loss of the same person, but you're all trying to do that within your own personalities and your own grief and your own anger and your own befuddlement at that loss, you are going to clash. There's going to be clashes there, and accepting that that's going to happen. That doesn't mean you don't all still love one another, as well as drive one another crazy, as well as sometimes really hate one another. Makes it really difficult to traverse that path. I liken the journey through grief, and this is saying it as someone who hasn't perhaps lost. I'm very fortunate, the really closest people to me, but I try and liken it to perhaps walking along a cliff edge in the fog, and you just have to sometimes you have to do it one step at a time. You can see the next step, but you can't see the one after. It feels really treacherous. It feels really unsafe. Feels really frightening. It's really hard work. The hills, the rocky terrain. It's really hard work. And as a celebrant, I cannot lift you up at the beginning of that journey and put you in a nice comfy limousine and take you to the other end. There's no way I can do that. What I can do, perhaps, is hold your hand and get you onto the path and point you in a direction. And I can do that as a celebrant by listening. But more important, I can do that by hearing. And I just spend time, and I allow the space for people to start telling stories. I always sit with a family and I say, "Have you got any pictures? Show me some pictures. What is it you remember most? What is it that drove you crazy about that person? What is it that you're feeling right now, if anything, because you might just be feeling nothing. And then I just say, why don't you just talk to me? Say whatever comes into your head. I'll just take some notes, hope that's okay. And I could record it. I prefer to take notes because then, while they're talking away, I might write down keywords that really resonate with me, or note something that hasn't been said, but the intonation of the voice has suggested something, and at some point it might be pertinent to bring that back into focus in the conversation. And I'll be with a family initially, probably 2 hours at least, if that's more if they need it. And sometimes, quite often actually, it's not just one person. So I might be given a contact by a funeral director. I'm just going to pause this a second because I think it's cold in here and the camera's steamed up. It's on back. Hello. So I was talking about really the need to hold space and to listen and to hear and to, which I haven't said already, is to be non-judgmental when with your listening. So it's kind of I don't say passive. It's I mean, I guess it is. You are listening and you are hearing, but you are not forming any judgments from that. You are just taking note, not just of the words said, the words not said, the body language, the looks that pass between different members of the family. You're looking at all of that. So it's not passive, it's the absolute opposite of passive. It is, you're proactively listening and proactively hearing and proactively watching and being aware. What you are not doing is is judging or making assumption. Hey, I'm Berni B, and I just wanted to talk today about loss and life celebrations and coming to terms with loss in an authentic way. And I've mentioned a few of these things before, but I don't think it hurts to reiterate them because I think we forget about these things and we need to say it in different ways. We as individuals are complex, multifaceted, black, white, grey, and every colour in between human beings, and we are perceived differently and sometimes behave differently with different people within the journey of our lives. And at different times in our lives, we are different people. And so everybody's story and remembrance of us is going to differ slightly to someone else's, and everybody's needs and expectations and journeys through grief are going to be different from each other's, and that makes it really difficult. It makes it a really difficult journey to travel together because have all potentially you've all lost the same person, but that person to each of you has been someone different and been an integral part of your life in a different way. So when we are dealing with grief, we're not just dealing with the loss of a person, we are dealing with a loss within ourselves. So if that person is particularly close to you, or if you had a particularly close bond with them, and if they have been lost suddenly, you have to rework out who you are yourself and how you fit into your life and your dynamic and how you need to behave and how you want to behave without that person present. You are also likely to be grieving not just the person you've lost, but the person you were when they were around. You have, through no plan of your own, become someone different because they are no longer there with you. And you're going to grieve the loss of the life and the path you were treading with them because they're no longer there to tread it. And you weren't ready to tread a different path, but you have been forced onto a different road through the loss of that person. And it's very difficult. So when you're dealing with grief, it's really complicated. Now I'm saying this from a purely from an empathetic and an observing point of view as a trained celebrant and a end of life doula in training. I'm not a counsellor. I'm not an expert in death, loss and grief. I haven't been trained as a bereavement counsellor, and I need to make that perfectly clear. I'm just talking to you today as an observer from my role as an end-of-life doula and a funeral celebrant. And I think the reason I am saying these things is because I hope that they might give you a light switch moment, enable you to accept an emotion that you're feeling at the moment that you are told in society and in movies and in tradition and in this whole great black hole of non-communicated things that you feel you shouldn't be feeling. When someone dies, you feel lots of things. What we expect to feel when someone dies is sad. We expect to cry. We expect to be grief-stricken. We expect to be heartbroken. But we can go through lots of other emotions too. And they might include feeling absolutely nothing at all, being completely detached from it, disassociated with it, feeling raging anger to the person who's died, to ourselves, to the people who were caring for that person, to other members of your family who are processing the information differently, to your friends. You might be feeling anger. You might just be in absolute denial and be feeling absolutely nothing and carrying on as normal. And these emotions and things may change over time and may change by the day or the hour or the minute. And what the message that I want to give to all of you, and the most important message that I think I can give to you, is whatever it is you are feeling or not feeling right now at this moment, wherever you are, is absolutely normal. If you are feeling it, that is the right feeling to be feeling at this moment. And there is no need to be concerned by that. So that's message one. Whatever you are feeling right now with your grief journey is normal and it's okay. Be that anger, be that grief, be that guilt, be that relief, whatever it is, it's normal and it's fine, and you have every right to feel it, and you do not need to worry about that. In 2 minutes, in 2 weeks, in 2 days, you may feel something different, and that is also normal and fine and okay. So that's lesson one, that's message one. So message two with the grief journey is I would love to encourage you to tell your authentic story. And by that I mean every single person dealing with this loss of one individual will experience that lots differently. And the ripples in the sea of the life of the person who's died will have hit you and be carried with you each in different ways. So your truth and your story may be very different from your sibling, your your relative, your neighbor, your partner, whatever it is, and that is fine. But being aware of your own truth and expressing that, even if it's in your own head, and acknowledging it, is really important. Um, and as a funeral celebrant, when I'm sat with a family, I try and encourage them to tell their warts and all stories about their interaction with that person, because it's as valid as anything else. If someone drove you crazy in life but you loved them, then say, they drove me crazy. I loved them, but they drove me crazy. They were never on time. They were always bloody late. It drove me mad, whatever time I said, they drove me mad. Or, they made the worst cup of tea I have ever tasted. I really hated the way they did this. Oh God. Or I absolutely adored this about them. Or they, you know, whatever it is, tell the story. My job as a funeral celebrant is to hold space, listen, and hear in a non-judgmental way, and then translate that into a celebration or memorial of the life of that person that reflects and represents your memories of them. So when I'm telling that story, when I'm standing by the graveside in the crematorium, at the in the hotel room, the story I am relaying that you have told me resonates, parts of it resonate with everybody within that room. Doesn't mean that all of it will, because you will all have these different memories of someone, but some of it will. And sharing stories and creating rituals to remember the warts and all person is so important. Otherwise, you're trying to traverse a travel a journey through grief with false information, with a map that's not right. If you have to do a journey and it's going to be a treacherous and difficult journey potentially, and you are going to have to travel it half blinded through a thick fog with all sorts of pitfalls, and you've got a map that is not of the place that you're traveling, how are you going to do it safely? It's hard enough as it is, but to have the wrong information when you're doing that is not going to help you get through that journey. So perhaps not share every story and every feeling with everyone at every moment, but at least acknowledge them within yourself, and then find the times and the places to share those authentic things. And I consider myself, may not be true, I consider myself a safe space for people to share those bits of information. So if I'm sat with a family quite often, they'll all be saying all the lovely things because I know, because dad's there and it's his mum who's just died, and they don't want to upset dad with some negative memories that they have, or some not so similar stories. But hopefully I can sense that, and I can encourage them to eke those out and say those to me somewhere else. It might not be that they go into the final script, but they have been acknowledged and accepted and not judged in any way, because they're valid. Every feeling and memory that you have of a person is one that you have to try and process. And if you can't even acknowledge it, how are you going to begin to process it? How are you going to lift that weight off you in the future and move forward? Because grief doesn't go away, and all of those things the word grief encompasses don't go away. What they do is they eventually lighten. I mean, there's lots of grief quotes out there, about uh, time healing and all of these types of things. But I would say that grief is a heavy burden sometimes to carry. And as you travel through time, that burden gets lighter, but you're always going to carry it. There's always going to be a rucksack full of that there, and sometimes you're going to trip over it. For anything like me with my big flat feet, you're going to trip over it, and you might not, And the nature of tripping over something is you don't expect it, so it's always going to be there. But hopefully, together at the beginning, especially with a sudden loss, that grief is humongously heavy. That sense of loss, that sense of confusion and anger and despair and hopelessness is a huge thing to bear. And as a community of family and friends, we travel through our grief journey initially as a community because we need to hold each other up, and we need to feed each other and support each other and comfort each other and carry each other and hold space for each other. That's why we live in community. That's why why the ritual of saying goodbye is so important. It's so we can gather together and take a moment to express and to acknowledge that we are stepping into this big, dark, uneven path into the unknown. And some of us will find that journey harder than others, and we can then all be there for each other at different times, because you can't always be the person who is there for the other person. Sometimes you're not the right person at that moment. Sometimes you won't have the strength. Sometimes you will be strong. Sometimes you won't want to. Sometimes the person at the brunt of the grief, I hate using that phrase, but sometimes the partner or the children will be at loggerheads with the partner or the other children or other relatives, because they're not grieving in the same way, and it doesn't seem acceptable to other members of the family. And it is complicated. I keep repeating it. It's complicated. All we can do as a community for each other is the best we can do. And there's this saying, and I can't remember who said it, is all you can do is do the best you can. And when you know better, then you can do better. But as long as your intention is good and your intention is there, then you can just keep doing better as you learn more about it. And we won't always say the right things, and we won't always know what to say. And that brings me on to another point. Why do friends behave the way they do when you have a loss? Imagine a horrific scenario. You've lost your partner. You didn't know you were losing your partner, or you've got a terminal illness, and you notice that some of your friends are there all the time. Some of them just disappear. Some of them seek you out. Some of them avoid you. What do you do about that? Why do they behave like that? Why do family behave that way? Why do friends behave that way? And how do we react to that? And I want to start by saying how the people around you react to you in your grief is not your problem. It is not your problem to solve, and it is not your job to make them feel less embarrassed or more comfortable in your presence. It's their problem, not yours. You do you. They will do them. And sometimes it's going to make you angry. And sometimes it's going to make you sad. But you've got enough to handle yourself. And friends behave the way they behave for lots of reasons. They're also in pain, might be one of the reasons. And they might have other things that they're in pain about, and they just haven't got the capacity at the moment to take on board anymore. They might be embarrassed. They don't know what to say. We are not taught. This is a terrible thing, and I really, really urge society and the education system to start talking more about death and dying and normalizing it like it used to be, so that we know we're less fearful of it and we know the language of it so that we can help one another more. But friends quite often, excuse me, friends quite often are embarrassed or uncomfortable. And the way they cope with embarrassment and discomfort is to avoid it. And that's not fair, but that's what happens. Doesn't mean they don't care about you, it means they don't know how to. I generally start, and it's probably not the right thing to do for everybody because what works for one person and what's said by one person to another is not right for somebody else. I generally say there's nothing I can say that's going to take the pain and the anguish away from you or whatever it is you're feeling right now, because what's happening is shit and there's nothing I can do to stop it being less shit or make it less shit than it already is, excuse my language. But I am here in whatever capacity you want me to be here. So I can be here, we can talk about it. I can be here, we cannot talk about it. I can do things, I cannot do things. But, I am here and I am aware. And that's all I can do. Fear is another reason friends start being evasive or avoiding you. They're frightened they'll say the wrong thing. If you're and what is the right thing? It depends on who you are and how you're dealing with the information that you have. You know, some people want you to acknowledge that they're looking well or doing well or encourage you to go out and have a nice time. Other people want to not do that, and not talk about it. The people are frightened of saying the wrong thing, so incorrectly they don't say anything at all and they don't put themselves in that situation. But that doesn't mean they don't care. They just haven't got any training on what to do because we don't talk about it. Sometimes they're in denial. They can't cope. You don't know what they've had in their life, maybe, and maybe they've been through something similar, or maybe they are going through something similar, and they just cannot cope with any more at the moment themselves. So maybe they are coping by denying that the situation is happening. Guilt. Does they feel guilty? Maybe they haven't dealt with something in their relationship with the person that you love or with you, and they are riddled with the guilt of it, and they've got their own journey to travel. Whatever the reasons are that friends don't behave how you want them to behave when you're dealing with your grief is not your problem. Even though it is hurting you or you're angry about it, it's not your problem. That if they are your real friends, and you will know if they're your real friends, then they will be doing the best they can, and that might not be good enough. And that is the reality of life. But yeah, grief is a complicated thing. That's all I'm saying. And the more you can become aware of the authenticity of it, like acknowledging your feelings, accepting that sometimes you might just forget and be happy for 5 minutes. You don't need to feel guilty about that. Or that you feel guilty because of something you didn't do, or that you feel angry because of what happened and the situation you now find yourself in, or that you just have no energy to get up in the morning. You don't have to be able to share all of everything that you are holding with every single person, but I really hope that each and every one of you has a somebody, and that might be a community of somebodies for each bit of that you can draw on. And if you haven't and you reach out, I will try and signpost you to someone who may be able to have that for you. Endings really matter, and being able to process the end really matters. And as a community of people and as an individual myself who works in the industry. None of us have all the answers for all the people, but what we can do as a community of people is signpost each other to other things that might help. But sadly, there is no shortcuts when you're dealing with grief. And if there's anything I can do, if anything in this conversation has triggered anything, I'm going to have a list. I'm going to start a list of help and support groups, and I'm going to put it onto my podcast page at the front of suggested support lines for you, because a lot of the conversations we're having over the next few weeks are going to trigger potentially things within you. So I will put that list out there. I don't have all the answers, but I will try, if anyone reaches out, to signpost you to the right place. Thank you for listening.